Welcome to Logical-NDE. My name is Emily, and it is my pleasure to narrate the near-death experiences of those who have seen the other side. If you are new to our channel, welcome. For our regular viewers, please sit back and enjoy today's episode.
Hi, my name is Dr. Lotte Valentine, and I've been asked to share my two near-death experiences with you. My first near-death experience happened 12 days after my third child was born. And this child was actually born between a 7.4 and a 7.2 earthquake. And while I was in labor, contracting 3 minutes apart, my labor actually stopped because at that moment, it was one of the moments in my life when I thought I was going to die. And this is important because of my NDE later on. But we were in the labor unit in the hospital. And in the hospital, they have all those metal trays with all the different metal equipment, metal instruments. And as this earthquake hit, those instruments were levitating and jumping up and down on those trays. And the hospital was built on rollers, and the birth was taking place in Eastern Anaheim in California. So for those of you who have been to Disneyland, it is in Anaheim, California. And this earthquake was centered in the desert. So we were the closest town to that earthquake. But there were windows from floor to ceiling in this unit, and the staff, the hospital staff, my husband, everybody was leaning over me on the table so I wouldn't levitate off the table. It was shaking that much. And it was one of those moments in my life when I thought I was going to die. And it's one of those moments when you sort of have your life flash before your eyes thinking, oh my gosh, this is it. I'm going to die. And it was so bad, my labor actually stopped. And after that, we lost all the power in the hospital, and we just had the light of a small light, like a night light. And the generators kicked in, and I was concerned about my boys. My boys were 6 and 3.5, and my parents were visiting from Europe to help with taking care of the kids as I was giving birth and having a new baby. And we called my parents, and they were okay. And my labor finally started back up, maybe 20 or 30 minutes later. And as soon as I had given birth and they finally gave me the baby to hold, I just leaned backwards on the table and just yelled for my husband. And I said, take the baby, because I was in excruciating pain. And at that point, there was a lot of blood clots that came out. And so that was really the first time that gave us a sign that something was not right. And as the placenta came out, it was as if, imagine having duct tape taped on the inside of your abdomen and somebody just rips off that duct tape, because that's what it felt like when the placenta came out. And as this was my third birth, I knew that something wasn't right, because that was not a pain that I had experienced before. And I asked the midwife, I said, please check the placenta, make sure all the pieces are there and nothing is missing. And I remember her holding up the placenta, and she was flipping it backwards and forwards. And she said, it looks whole. But granted, we only had the light of a night light in this birthing unit. And then I had all these blood clots come out. They put me on an IV drip and massaged my uterus. And I stayed an extra day in the hospital to make sure the bleeding had come down. And then 10 days after the birth, was July 8th. My daughter was born June 28th. I started hemorrhaging, and I had this excruciating pain on the inside. So imagine, it felt like I had swallowed a bowling ball, and the bowling ball was just sitting in my pelvis and pushing down. So the pain was coming down and going down into my legs. And I had I was hemorrhaging a huge blood clot the size of a baby's head or a fist of a large man, just very, very large. And we went to the ER, and they did a manual inspection, and they said, well, maybe a second lining came out. It doesn't seem to be anything wrong. There was no lab work. There was no ultrasound. I looked like the picture of health. I was 34. We lived in California. It was in June. So of course, on the surface, I did not look sick, which still happens today. We get judged by how we look and not the way what's going on inside. And so after keeping me for observation, they sent me home. And then the next day I hemorrhaged again. Another large blood clot came out. And as I'm lying on the bed, my husband's on the phone talking to the hospital. I said, I'm not going because the bleeding stopped. They're not going to do anything because we were there the day before. And so it was decided I should see the doctor the next morning where we lived in California. I saw the doctor. It was Friday morning, July 10th. And again, a manual inspection. And he said, well, it could have been 2 linings that came out. And there was no lab work, no ultrasound. And this is back in 1992. And I was sent on my way. And then again, later that day, I hemorrhaged again, another large blood clot. And so at this point, we said, okay, I've lost a lot of blood by now. So let's go back to the ER. So we went back to the ER. Again, another manual inspection. And they said, well, not that much blood is coming out right now. And they left me there for observation. They closed the door. I did not have a bell to ring for help. I did not have an IV placed. I was just lying on this table. And after a while, I started bleeding again. And I was used to bleeding now. And it wasn't a large blood clot. It was just more normal, more slowly trickling blood. And I was just thinking, I was happy that I was finally bleeding in the ER because maybe they would figure out something was actually wrong. And as I'm lying on this table, and the papers I'm lying on are getting soaked in my blood, the nurse opens the door and to come in and check on me. And her jaw just drops open. She says, oh, gasping for air as she sees the blood on the table. And I hear the call in the loudspeaker, OBGYN, stat to the ER, OBGYN, stat to the ER. And all I can think of is I'm happy that finally they're figured out something is wrong. And shortly thereafter, so she cleaned up the bloody paper, put him in the wastebasket, and this middle-aged physician came into the room, literally running into the room, out of breath, because I knew he had run to the ER, and with a younger physician in tow. And he asked me, what was going on, and I told him I was hemorrhaging again, and this has been going on since Wednesday now, so it was my 3rd day of hemorrhaging. And he looked in the wastebasket and he saw all those bloody papers. And again, we did a manual inspection. And as they're doing this manual inspection, another large blood clot comes out. And I tried to sit up and tell the doctor, and I said, I'm not feeling too good. And at that point, he knew how much blood I had lost. And so he knew, and he understood what was going on. And this is the doctor that saved my life. And he just pushed me back down onto the table, and he started to tip the table backwards. So my feet were going up into the ceiling and my head was going down towards the floor to try and get my vital organs to give the little blood that I had left to go to the heart and the brain. And as they're doing that, my eyes are now closed because I can't keep my eyes open anymore. And I can hear the room filled with the hospital staff and commands being given. And I have a nurse on my left putting a blood pressure cuff on my arm. And I have a nurse on my left trying to place an IV. And back then, I guess they didn't place IVs. Today, they often place an IV when you go to the ER because if something happens, they have access to your veins. And when you start going into shock, your veins start collapsing. So it makes it much harder to insert an IV into that vein. So it's just a precautionary thing that is done a lot when you go to the ER today. So I'm lying on this table. And at this point, I feel like I'm just falling, like free falling through the air. So imagine jumping out of an airplane without a parachute and just falling to the ground. And that's how I felt. And I remember thinking, what's taking this nurse so long? Why can't she get that IV in? And as I'm lying on this table, I become aware that I'm dying. And the nurse on my right, she yells out, 50 over 15, hurry, she yells. And at that point, the blood pressure is so low now that it can't support a heartbeat. So around 60 over 20, you don't have enough pressure to support that heartbeat. And it was shortly after this nurse yelled that I knew that I was dying. And that knowing that I was dying was very different from that experience that I had when I was giving birth and I thought I was going to die. And I think a lot of us have had that experience in life. We're close to being in a car accident and we're thinking, oh my gosh, this is it. I'm going to die. But that thought of thinking I'm going to die was very different from this experience when I knew that I was dying. And as I'm lying on this table, and I feel like I'm just free falling, like hanging off a cliff with just holding on to your nails. It was just at any split second, I wasn't going to be able to hold on any longer. And I could feel my soul starting to separate from my body. And I'm just lying on this table, holding on to my soul. And I said, no, we can't leave. We can't leave. We have to stay. And as I'm fighting to hold on to my life, and even, I start praying. And at that point in my life, I didn't believe in the afterlife. I didn't believe in the spirit world. I didn't believe in God. I didn't believe in anything. I thought when you die, it's black and you're gone, and that's it. There is no God. There is no religion. Even though I had been confirmed when I was 14, I was raised Lutheran in the country of Sweden, but I didn't believe in any of it. And here I am, struggling to hold on to my life. And so what do? I prayed to God to save my life. I said, if there is a God out there, if there is a greater source, a greater being of some kind, please let me live. And I said, I have 3 children under the age of 6. They need a mother. And shortly after that, I was just pulled out of my body. And it's one split second, I was inside my body, and the next split second, I was outside, because it happens so quickly that it's just an instant transition from being inside to outside your body. And as I'm outside my body, I find myself maybe 3 to 5 feet floating above my body. And as I'm outside my body, my first thought is, how can I be outside my body and still be me? How does this work? This is not supposed to happen, because I had no belief system that this was even possible. And as I'm in this state, I'm completely aware of unconditional love, the peace, the calm. But also, one thing that I became aware of was that in this state, there was no time. Time was completely irrelevant in this state. There was no separation of past, present, and future. I had access to all information, whether it was past, present, and future. And as I'm in this state, I'm also aware that I belong to that body that's down there on the table. That's my house, as I call it. We live in that house, our body, while we're here on earth having this experience. Just like you live in your house, or you live in your apartment, or you drive your car, but you can step outside your car. So imagine, like, you step outside your house or your car, and that's your soul. But we don't see it or feel it. We just feel like we're one, right? We just feel like our body, our personality is us. But there is actually 2 components. The soul is who we are, or the spirit. And it just lives in this body to animate the soul while we're here. And shortly after that, I was just sucked back into my body. Again, just in a split second, I was back in my body. And then, of course, they kept me in the hospital an extra day. But what happened with this first near-death experience was that the next day, I was aware of the spirit world. And so I'm lying in this hospital bed, and I'm aware that my sister-in-law is in the left corner of my ceiling. And as I'm lying in this bed, I can hear her, and she says, everything is going to be okay. And I said, how can I hear the spirit world? And what happened to me yesterday? Am I going crazy? If I tell anyone, they're probably going to lock me up in the mental ward, and I'll never see my children again. And I was so afraid of sharing the experience in the beginning. And the nurse next day that came to visit me, she said, did you experiencing anything unusual yesterday? because she knew. She was obviously aware of near-death experiences, and she was aware that I might have had that kind of experience. But I was so afraid of sharing my experience. I just told her, nope, nothing at all. Nothing happened. And then I was released from the hospital. And I also became aware of the spirit world, and relatives that passed away would come visit me in the middle of the night. And that whole door just opened up for me into the spirit world. And then I became really sick, and I had something called bone marrow suppression. So I wasn't making enough white blood cells, red blood cells, or platelets. And I was really sick. And as I struggled to heal from this bone marrow suppression, I had another near-death experience. But this second experience was very different from the first one. And I always joke that I didn't get the full effect because they saved my life too quickly. And so we had to go down this other path, and I had to be sick for a couple of years, and I had to have the second experience. And it's really the two experiences together that activated my life path. But during the second experience, it was very different. And I got pulled out of my body, and I just tumbled through darkness. So almost like a Star Wars movie, you're just tumbling through space. And I get to this place that I call a mid station, because I had this awareness that there was levels above me and levels below me. So you could go higher or you could go lower. And I call it the bouncing station because they sent me back. And so to me, it was as if I got to this place by accident and they sent me back because I wasn't supposed to be there. And so I arrive at this mid station, and as I get to this place, I hear the most beautiful music. And you can't make this music on the earth plane because it's just too beautiful. And I tried to recreate the sound. We had a synthesizer with probably 200 sounds back then. There was not one sound that sounded like the music I had heard. And as I'm looking around to see where this music is coming from, I turn to the right, and I don't have a body. I'm just like an entity. And I turn to the right, and I see a little log cabin, and it's just sort of floating in space. And I open the door to the log cabin, and I look inside, and I said, it's empty. And so I look to my left, and I see another log cabin, and I open the door, look inside, but it's empty. And I'm wondering where this music is coming from. And then I become aware of this growing bright white light. And it's the most purest, brightest, whitest light you could imagine. And it's almost like if you're standing and the fog is rolling in, but the fog is this beautiful, bright white light. And as I turn around, I become, submerged into this light. It's just everywhere, as far as you can see. But this light is like being with source. You can call it God. You can call it source. You can call it divine essence. Whatever name you want to give it, it is what we come from. We incarnate from this. We are part of this light. And this light is just pure, unconditional love. And that is who you truly are. We are unconditional, pure love. And when we die and we come back to this light. So we carry this light within us. We are part of this light. But when we pass and we leave this third dimension on earth, we go back to source and we go back to this light. But in this light, in this angelic white light, there is an outline of angels. And the music is coming from the angels. And as I'm listening to this most beautiful music, I become aware of two spirit guides. And there's one on my right and one sort of to the left diagonally in front of me. And the spirit guide on the right communicates with the other spirit guide. And he says, what is she doing here? She can't be here. She has to go back. And I say, no. Wait a second. How can this be? How can I be outside my body and still be me? And the spirit guide on my left says, if I told you, you wouldn't remember. So there's some kind of mechanism that they have that they can control what we get to remember. And he said, but you will remember this. And then it's almost like a movie screen appears because the image just appear out of nowhere. But it was as if I was standing on the moon and I was looking down onto the earth from outer space. But around the earth was what I called at the time a silvery, glittery fishnet, because a fishnet tends to be diamond shaped like this. And there was like glittery nodes at each of the nodes of this net. And I called it the fishnet because I grew up in Europe, in Northern Europe, in Sweden, and I spent my summers on an island without electricity or running water. And my grandmother would lay nets in the ocean to catch fish for the family to eat. And I would row her the rowboat while she would lay the nets and take them out of the ocean. And when she took the nets out in the early morning sun, the water droplets on the fishnet would sparkle in the morning sunlight. And so to me, it looked like a fishnet around the earth. And this is back in 1994. So we didn't have internet then. We could not Google grid around the earth or anything like that. And the spirit guide said, everything on earth is connected to each other. And everything on earth is connected up to this grid. And with that information, I was sent back to earth. And that is, these two near-death experiences together is what really has activated my life. And as I became aware of the spirit world for the next 12 years, it was just constant. I would see things before they happened. And I knew when people had passed away. I knew when relatives were sick and needed to go to the hospital. And this opening into the spirit world happened for many, many, many years. And now this has been 30 years of me connecting to the spirit world. And after 12 years of hearing the spirit world, I received a message from the spirit world, and they said, you have to become a physician. You have to go to medical school and become a doctor. You're to bring messages and healing to the people. And you are to write 2 books. No, wait, 3. And I've received that message of writing 2 books. No, wait, 3. I've gotten that message 4 times from professional mediums around the world that don't know anything about me or anything about my life. And it's always that same message. So after going to medical school at the age of 54, I graduated when I was 58. I immediately started writing my book and also developing my spiritual abilities. So they also asked me to share my book with you, and it looks like this. It's called Med School After Menopause, The Journey of My Soul. And it actually won an award, and I got first place in the category of spiritual leadership. And it has the 2 stories in here in more detail, my near-death experiences, but it also has all the stories of how my mediumship developed and my spirituality developed. And there are little short exercises after each chapter. And it's my hope that it will help you tune into your own intuition, because we are all intuitive creatures. We all have intuition. And many of us have either felt the spirit world come close to us, knowing that grandma or mom or dad or a sibling, somebody close to us have passed. And many of us have these experiences. So it's my hope that it will help you develop your own intuition and create a path to healing your own life physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And so I now work as a physician, and I work spiritually as well with people. I work as an evidential psychic medium. I also do work a lot with ancestral healing, because I studied ancestral healing as a form of counseling, but I also work with the spirit world when I do this. And so we can create healing because we are truly all connected. And by healing your life physically, emotionally, and spiritually, you not only heal yourself, but you help heal the rest of the world. If you want to learn more about me, please visit my website. It's drlotte.com, drlotte.com. And I hope you have all enjoyed me sharing the story, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day and life.
Thanks for watching today's episode. Please don't forget to give us a like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.